So our next session is on enhancing resilience in an uncertain world. The past year has seen further developments of the National Cybersecurity Centre in response to the capacity review as endorsed by the government, and new regulatory developments, as we heard from Lorena, and also obviously the change in the geopolitical landscape across Europe. The NCSC and the NCSC strategy is under review. The new arrangements to support industry, the public sector and research are underway. And so to discuss these developments and the plans for the future and the relevance to our national security and the impact on industry, we have a dedicated session here from our National Cybersecurity Centre. Now, this was going to be chaired by the director of the NCSC, Richard Brown, but unfortunately he just couldn't make it this morning. And so we have Joseph Stevens, who's the head of engagement at the NCSC, who's going to chair the session for us. Joseph.
Shall we bring up the chairs?
I'll bring them up afterwards, yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Just want to start by saying the NCSC is delighted to be here. Cyber Ireland is one of our key stakeholders, and it's great to see so many people in the room, and looking forward to hearing all the presentations today as well as speaking with you throughout the day. I'm not cool enough for a roving mic, so I'm going to hang around here at the podium. My colleagues are going to join me now up on stage as well. So we have myself. I'm going to give an overview of the threat landscape. I'm also going to introduce you to the NCSC and what we do for anybody who's not aware of our roles and responsibilities. Then my colleague Peter Hogan is going to give an overview of the National Cybersecurity Strategy and update on the measures in that, and also the midterm review, as Owen mentioned. And then my colleague James Caffrey from the National Cybersecurity Centre is going to give you an update on a new unit we've established focused on capacity development for industry and academia. Okay, so starting off with the National Cybersecurity Centre. There's the agenda. So the NCSC, this is our mission. Our mission is to lead in enhancing the security of essential network and information systems in the state against cyber threats, facilitating a free, open and secure and stable digital ecosystem for the people of Ireland. So it's a lofty and ambitious goal, but it's really important for everybody in the NCSC to remind us on a daily basis of what we do and why we do it. And that feeds into everything that we do. How we do it, we do a lot of things, but it can be boiled down to, I suppose, 5 key areas. The first, and sort of what we've done since the very start of our establishment over 10 years ago, is national incident response, incident detection and response. And our team, CSIRT, now known as the operations team, lead in that work. We also have a role in risk assessment and situational awareness, so trying to get an understanding of what the cyber threat landscape is and giving that information out to our constituents so that everybody has a cohesive understanding of what Ireland's threat landscape looks like. Then increasing the engagement is one of the most important parts of our work, and the team I head up, the engagement team, that's our core mission, is to engage with all of our stakeholders, whether that's in government, critical infrastructure, industry, academia, and increasingly we're trying to engage more to the public. And this is European Cybersecurity Month, and we've a lot of activities going on this month to try and raise awareness about cybersecurity and the measures that individuals can take to protect themselves. We have a role in cyber resilience, and we do that in a number of ways. Firstly, through, as been mentioned, we are the competent authority for the NIS directive, so we oversee operators of essential services in this state, checking their compliance with that directive. We have new teams in certification, and that it's been mentioned by the previous 2 speakers, and that's going to be a growing area for us. And then James is going to give you an insight into the work we're going to be doing in capacity development. This is how we're set up. I won't go into too much details, but we're changing. As Owen mentioned, there was the capacity review and increased investment in the unit. So, at the start of this year, we were 25 people. It's a very small organisation, and we do a lot with those few people. But as of the end of this year, we should be up to around 47. By the end of next year, we'll be 67 people. And this is how we are organised. We have 2 main directorates. We have the Directorate of Operations, and within that you have security operations, risk operations and engineering. Security operations is that incident response, dealing with crisis, responding to incidents. Risk operations is future looking, trying to mitigate threats before they happen, active cyber defense type measures, vulnerability management, etc. And then engineering, that's the team that looks after all of our tool set, all of our technology, and making sure that we're using effective tools. Then engagement is the team I lead. We're in the Resilience Directorate, but we sort of straddle the boat because we have really close working relationship with ops, and everything we do is about trying to plug that operational team into the wider infrastructure. Capacity development, James will speak about that. As I said, compliance, we have a team that goes out to airports, to power generation sites, to hospitals, checking the level of cybersecurity in those organizations. Certification, a new team being established to oversee implementation of various certification schemes in the country, flowing out from EU directives. And then finally, we have a project management team. They're the money people who keep us honest, who make us fill out horrific Gantt charts to make sure that our projects are progressing as they should. Okay, so into my presentation, which is, I'm going to give you an overview of the threat landscape as we see it in the NCSE. I have, I think, about 15 minutes to do this, so it's not going to be a deep dive by any means, but we want to talk about some of the key trends that we're seeing, particularly since the National Cybersecurity Strategy was published in the end of 2019. So it's kind of useful, I suppose, at this point to think about the context of when that strategy was written. And you know, sometimes we're so focused on dealing with the latest cyber threat that you forget about how much the threat landscape has changed in a very short amount of time. This strategy was written sort of through 2018 into 2019, and you know, that was obviously before COVID, and that was a huge change to the cyber threat landscape. We had thousands and millions of people thrust into the online domain working from home, and that's had a huge impact on how the threat landscape has evolved. Kelly mentioned earlier the change in the ransomware model. Back when this was written in 2018 was around the tipping point when things started to shift. It really picked up around 2020, 2021 when you had the ransomware as a service model. And it's interesting to note that in the National Cybersecurity Strategy, the word ransomware doesn't appear. And that gives an indication of the landscape at the time. That would be unthinkable today, to write a strategy that doesn't focus on ransomware. Obviously, the HSE attack happened in 2021. That was a real red flag moment for Ireland about understanding that cybersecurity isn't just something that all of us tech nerds talk about. It's something that can impact real people and their lives. And then, of course, we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine this year, which again has shaken things up significantly. So the first thing I wanted to speak about in terms of the threat landscape is vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities aren't new. They've been in threat landscapes, I'd imagine, since anybody's been writing threat landscapes. There's that famous story of the word for bug comes from the fact that a moth was found on a relay in a computer system in Harvard back in 1947, and that's how they coined the term bug. So it's been around a long time. But in the past couple of years, 2021, 2022 in particular, there's been a huge amount or increase in the number of vulnerabilities. And that's a function, of course, of increased digitization. More software means more vulnerabilities. But there has been an increase in the number of 0 days, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, there's more eyes, there's more researchers, there's more people looking for vulnerabilities. But there's also, as cyber resilience increases and as organizations become more mature in the measures they take, and users are more aware, less likely to be phished, threat actors, nation states, but increasingly criminal actors are using vulnerabilities to exploit. And there's been an increase, and I think for the first time, vulnerabilities have surpassed phishing as the most common entry point. Another trend that we're seeing is the increased weaponization, the increased speed of weaponization. So the time from when a vulnerability is discovered to when that is weaponized as an exploit and used in the wild has shortened. And I think the average is about 8 days now. Of course, it can be much shorter than that. It can be down as low as hours from when something's discovered to when attackers are out there. And it's always, coin miners are always the first for some reason. So when we see an exploitation in the wild, the guys who want to make money spreading their coin miners all around, that's what we see first. But then closely followed after are criminal actors and nation states. And it means that we have to prioritize our remediation of vulnerabilities and be focused on what we remediate. There was 21,000 vulnerabilities in 2021. That's not possible to remediate all of those. And a good way of doing it is what our colleagues in the US have started to do, which is to maintain a known exploited vulnerability register. So you know these ones are being exploited at the moment by threat actors. The next thing I wanted to look at was the changes and the trends we're seeing in the criminal actor space. We've seen, and I'll refer back again to Kelly's presentation, you know, that model has changed. There's no longer the one-man band, the kind of hacker who goes out, who does everything from developing malware to initial entry to exploiting and lateral movement to stealing the data. Everybody has their own speciality. There's increased specialization, increased sophistication, and collaboration between all of the threat actors. And it's allowing efficiencies, and it's making the criminal space much more professional. It mirrors in some ways how software is developed in the private industry. There's also, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the weaponization of discovered vulnerabilities is something that is happening much, much faster. And as we had discussions earlier on about companies migrating to the cloud, criminals are migrating to the cloud in two ways. They're obviously starting to target cloud much more frequently, and we're seeing threat actors targeting cloud, and they're also moving to the cloud themselves. They see the advantages of the cloud, the scalable, flexible nature of it, and infrastructure is coming up and being pulled down very, very quickly, and that's a change that we're seeing. And as I said, they're mirroring the private industry. So you're seeing threat actors now have their own bug bounty programs, where you have people coming to threat actors saying, you know, your malware is vulnerable in this way, and then they'll pay them, thanking them for the service. So it's interesting to see that. Obviously, a subset of criminal actors is ransomware. It continues to be the highest threat in Ireland globally. And some of the trends we're seeing, obviously, is that they're targeting critical infrastructure in a real way. You know, Colonial Pipeline was a wake-up moment that, you know, you can see real physical effects in the world. There was gas shortages on the east coast of the US. That's now becoming, I won't say a day-to-day thing, but only in the last few months we've seen attacks in Greece, we've seen attacks in Italy, we've seen attacks in Germany, all having real-life impacts on the industrial and energy sector. A trend we're seeing is the rebranding, and again, this is, you know, how threat actors are sort of mirroring the corporate world. They live and die by their brand is their reputation, but it's also their impediment to their work. So once law enforcement start to put pressure on them, once there's political pressure, once they can't get ransoms anymore because of sanctions, they rebrand. You know, DarkSide became Black Matter, which became Black Cat, and it makes our job tracking these actors extremely difficult because they keep changing name, they keep changing tactics, and the people behind the groups move around all the time, because at the end of the day, these people find it very difficult to get on with each other, so they fall out, they fight, and they reorganize. But there are disruption efforts happening. We're part of a global initiative, the Counter Ransomware Initiative, led by the White House. There's the one-year anniversary of it coming up in November, and there will be some announcements. And it's being tackled at a global stage from a diplomatic point of view, from a policy point of view, from a resilience point of view, from a disruption point of view. It's been looked at from all angles. I don't expect that when we're giving the threat landscape in 2023, ransomware won't be there, but there is a major effort to try and counter it. So in terms of nation-state actors, the trends that we're seeing is, firstly, that geopolitical events drive the cyber operations of nation-states. You cannot view the actions of a nation-state in a bubble, just looking at what they're doing in a cyber point of view. It needs that wider context, because the timbre of cyber operations by nation-states rises and falls based on their geopolitical ambitions. And the obvious example is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which saw a massive increase in the cyber operations related to Russia during that invasion. We've seen an increased usage of disruptive attacks. These were not commonplace before, when the last National Cybersecurity Strategy was written. There was only a handful of examples. There's something like, I think, 9 destructive malware have been discovered since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we've also seen a plethora of OT-specific malware. They're still quite rare, but there's 7 now compared to when the National Cybersecurity Strategy was written. I believe there was only 2. Nation states are obviously continuing to conduct information operations. And whilst this isn't particularly, cyber, a lot of it has a cyber component, particularly hack and leak operations, and we're seeing those continuing. However, espionage continues to be the main focus of nation-state actors. Whilst we can all get focused in on the details of destructive malware and the interesting characteristics of it, for the vast majority of cases, espionage is the main goal of nation-state actors. In terms of hacktivists, there has been a huge change since the strategy was written, particularly this year. 2022 has seen a massive resurgence in hacktivist organizations, and they can essentially be divided between those that are pro-Russian and those that are pro-Ukrainian. Here in Europe, obviously, we're seeing much more of the pro-Russian groups. Their tactics are generally to conduct DDoS and website defacement type operations, and while they are extremely active, they are more of a nuisance than anything else. They haven't caused any major damage across the Union at this stage. They're increasingly using lock and leak tactics, where they will imitate ransomware groups and encrypt the data, but immediately leak it in a strategic way. And an interesting case study in hacktivist is hybrid groups like the IT Army of Ukraine, which was a sort of call to arms when the invasion started by the Ukrainian government to set up this IT Army of Ukraine, which is something like 30,000 members on its Telegram channel. It's hard to classify that. Is it a state actor? It's certainly being directed by a state, but it's mainly made up of decentralized individuals. However, the targeting and the direction comes from a state. So there's still a lot of research and studies to be written on this topic. And finally, again, it's been mentioned a couple of times today, but supply chain is something that it's not new, but it's certainly much, much more prevalent since the National Cybersecurity Strategy has been written. 2020 had the SolarWinds attack, which was one of the first major impactful attacks on the supply chain. And since then, we've seen many, many more supply chain attacks. Threat actors, and not just nation states, criminal actors too, are increasingly targeting the supply chain. And there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, because organizations themselves are becoming much more resilient, and therefore it's much more difficult to directly attack a target. You also have, when you're attacking someone like a managed service provider, cloud provider, software provider, you can attack one person but get access to many organizations. And that's obviously extremely attractive to both ransomware groups and nation state actors. I think 17% of attacks in 2021 were supply chain attacks, and that is massively increased from the previous year, which was only 1% of attacks. So I'm going to finish up with our assessment in the NCSE of these various threat actors and where we see things. These are the threat level descriptions that we use. I won't read them out, but you can see we go from no threat all the way to very high. Often when cybersecurity reports are written either by the media or industry, it's all about catastrophic events and hyped up language, but this is quite a dry threat assessment, and you may even be surprised at some of the levels. But as we see it, with nation state actors, the threat of cyber espionage against both public and private organizations is assessed to be high. The risk of a targeted destructive attack in Ireland is assessed as low. The risk of targeted information operations is low to medium. In terms of cyber criminals, the threat from cybercrime, in particular ransomware groups, remains a significant threat and is assessed as high, and it will remain likely the primary threat in Ireland in the medium term. In hacktivists, the threat of hacktivist groups has increased post the Russian invasion of Ukraine from low to medium. But as I said, that threat is not based on the impact, it's based on the likelihood of attacks, which we have seen. Cyber terrorism, I didn't mention it during the threat landscape because there is no threat, there's no group at the moment that has the capability or intent to conduct cyber operations. Individual hackers is assessed as low. I should mention that when I say that that's assessed as low, that's at a national level. An individual hacker, we assess a low threat to a national impact, but individual hackers can still have high impact on organizations themselves. And I'll point to the loose affiliation of individual hackers, Lapsus, and the success that they have had through pretty basic techniques. And finally, supply chain is assessed as medium. There will be time for questions at the end, but I'm going to hand over to my colleagues just to be fair on time, and then we can take questions at the end. But that's just to set the context of how things have changed since the strategy was written, which Peter is now going to speak about.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Joe, and thanks Cyber Ireland for the invitation and for facilitating our panel today. I'm going to try to be brief so that there's plenty of time for questions, but what I'm here to talk about is really around our National Cybersecurity Strategy, which Joe has been speaking about, which was published in 2019. So I'm really going to give you a quick refresher on the strategy for those of you who may not be as familiar with it, and then present some of the progress that we've made in the past couple of years, implementing the measures that are in the strategy. I'm going to run through some of the current challenges and opportunities as we see them, and this is not going to be particularly groundbreaking. You've heard a lot of them already today, but just to sort of highlight them, I suppose, again. And then I'm going to conclude then just by talking about the mid-term review of the strategy, which is a process that's currently underway in the department. So, moving on then, I suppose, to do a quick recap on the strategy. So it was actually the second national strategy, which was published in 2019, and the vision is, as you see there on the screen there, in relation to what we were hoping to achieve during the period of the strategy. And the way we tend to think of the strategy within the department and within the NCSC is along three key pillars: protect, develop, and engage. So when we speak about protect, we're talking about protecting the state, we're talking about protecting people, we're talking about incidents, we're talking about cyber threats in that sense. When we look at develop, it's much broader, obviously, so we're talking about developing our own capacity and the capacity of public sector bodies, but we're also talking about developing the cyber sector industry and developing businesses, enterprises, and critical national infrastructure, which is very important as well for us. And then finally, in relation to engagement, so Joe has already mentioned the work that his team does at a national level, but also the strategy speaks to the work we do internationally with our colleagues in the Department of Foreign Affairs around diplomacy, around engagement in the EU negotiations, and indeed the work that's happening at the ITU, UN Open-Ended Working Group, and other fora, and that's in that regard. Within the strategy, there are 20 measures for delivery, and they're kind of grouped. I'll talk to them a bit more on when I get to the next slide, but you'll see there's quite a broad range of measures covering a huge range of activities. And the governance and overview and sort of implement what keeps us honest, if you like, in terms of the strategy is a high-level interdepartmental committee, which is chaired at Assistant Secretary level in the department. And that group meets quarterly to assess progress and discuss issues of concern. And actually, we just had our most recent meeting on Thursday of last week. So moving on then, I suppose, just this is a kind of a handy overview, I guess, visually speaking, in terms of what the progress looks like at the moment in relation to implementing the 20 measures. So you'll see we group the measures under the three pillars: protect, develop, and engage, and then they're subsequently grouped then into individual chapters that are set out in the strategy document itself. And I'm happy to say that it's a positive story to tell at this stage. We've a lot of green there on the screen, which shows that either progress is substantially achieved, or actually we've achieved what we set out to do in 2019. And that's really, I think, a consequence of a lot of hard work by the NCSC and also by our partners, including Cyber Ireland, and really good cooperation, which was possible even in spite of the challenges of COVID-19. And just to highlight, I suppose, a couple of maybe particular achievements that were delivered. So last November, the government published the Public Sector Cybersecurity Baseline Standard. So this is a new baseline standard of cybersecurity. It's aligned with international standards and norms for all public bodies to achieve. And that was delivered through a really strong collaboration with partners across the public sector, including local government, and was a really positive development, which is being built on at the moment, with that group is continuing to work together very well. Secondly, we have delivered a first year of a pilot junior cycle cyber skills short programme, So that was obviously quite difficult to do with the disruption to the education system. But the first year has been delivered, and that pilot is currently in its second year at the moment, and is going to be extended for a further year as well. A lot of really useful learning from that in relation to skills development at second level. And then finally, I suppose just to mention on the high level, the European Cybersecurity Month campaigns have been really progressing really well in recent years. And last year we had some really impressive engagement, both with the infographics and the video material that was produced, and that's something I think that we're building on now. And this year's campaign was just launched yesterday by Minister McEntee and Minister of State Smith. So then, I suppose, in some areas, as I said earlier, we've delivered actually on the target, and so it's a question now of what's next for us. So an example there would be around expanding the NCSE's sensor programme to government departments. So that's now in place across the government estate, which is an excellent result. But I suppose now we're in a question, I suppose, is it possible to take that further, working with stakeholders, or are there questions around legal powers which need to be addressed? And then just to sort of flag, I suppose, in a couple of areas where the context has changed quite considerably, not just in relation to the threat landscape, as Joe has outlined, but I think there's also a much greater expectation of the services that the NCSE is delivering and can deliver with its increased capacity. And also just to flag in the context of legislative provisions, regulatory provisions, that where we had looked at doing legislation for critical national infrastructure, and that's really been superseded by the review of the NIS directive, which Lorena spoke about earlier on. Moving on then, I suppose, to where we are now with our midterm review exercise, and looking at some of the challenges and opportunities as we see them. As I say, there's not much there you haven't heard already today, but just, I suppose, just to quickly run through some of these. So Joe has given a very comprehensive overview of the threat landscape at the moment, and obviously it's changed quite considerably since the strategy was written. On the COVID-19 situation, I think absolutely the shift to working from home has been a big impact on what we do. But there's also, I suppose, the recognition of the value of delivering public services online and going into services like education and other areas. And then I suppose further to that, I would say across government now there's a much greater awareness of the importance of resilience of services and institutions that I think is bearing out in the cyber domain as well. On EU legislation, I won't talk too much about this because we've already heard a lot from Lorena, but I really want to emphasise, I suppose, that NIS2 represents a radical overhaul of the EU regulatory regime for important and critical sectors, with a very large expansion in scope and enhancement of powers, and actually, as well as that it will require us to put together a new strategy when we're transposing it as well. The cyber skills gap, I thought it was really interesting to hear Paul talking about this earlier, and it being highlighted as the number one challenge for the sector. We certainly see that ourselves as well. We have some actions that were set out in the 2019 strategy, but I think we understand there's a need to go further to really try to support industry and the education institutions wherever we can. And just to flag that when we discussed the strategy at our meeting last week of the Interdepartmental Committee, skills was the one issue that people really seized upon, and the real challenge it presents from a public sector perspective in relation to securing our systems. And then finally, there on the challenges side, I've just flagged coordination of the research and innovation activities. I think to say that there's a lot of really good work happening in Ireland in research, but I think it's just that challenge of tying it together and knitting it together. And James will talk a little bit more about this in his presentation subsequently. Just turning to opportunities then, I think increased investment, we have to see it as an opportunity. It's been a really positive story the last 18 months in terms of where we're going. And just last week, where there was a further announcement of an increase in funding for the NCSE of €6.5 million in that budget for 2023, which is really positive. As Joe outlined, the staffing numbers are going up all the time. So we're moving towards 47 at the end of this year and 67 at the end of 2023. So I think we're certainly going to be going beyond that target of 70 that was set last July by the government, which is really positive. There's a lot of really good progress being made on the new facility for the NCSE at the department's headquarters in Beggars Bush. And work has just got underway on a new technology strategy, and that's going to inform capital investment and also the legislation that's being prepared for the NCSE. Improved cooperation and information sharing. I think this is one of the interesting positives from the Ukraine situation in particular, is it's really focused minds, I guess, on the importance of sharing information, particularly in Europe, and have been a really positive development over the last 6 months, and the NCSC is seeing the benefit of that. And also just to note that the government's recently approved us joining the NATO MISP, and also that we're joining a number of other international information sharing groups at the moment. The development of Cyber Ireland I'd see as a real opportunity. I mean, here we are at the second conference. It's just terrific to see sold out conference, and the broad range, as we heard earlier on, in relation to the regional development as well. So we really see that as a great opportunity for us to work with industry in that way. We also really welcomed the industry report that was published earlier this year, and the policy recommendations in that, which are really helpful to us in terms of informing the next steps for the strategy. And then finally, I think other people have mentioned this as well, but cybersecurity is regularly in the news in Ireland. As a kind of a quirk of fate, I actually lived in Estonia shortly after the Bronze Soldier incident and the sort of the first large-scale cyber attacks. So it was quite interesting to see there how people kind of took that to heart, and they translated that into a very progressive cybersecurity strategy, looking to be a cybersecurity leader. And I think we're in a similar space at the moment in Ireland, where we have this high awareness of cybersecurity, of its importance, and of the impact when you don't take resilience measures in particular, and cyber incidents occur on your essential services. So I'll just wrap up here now with the final slide, folks. So just in terms of our midterm review process, so just to clarify that it's quite a short and focused process that we're working through at the moment. So we are currently drafting the consultation paper, and it's at a very advanced stage in drafting. I expect it'll be circulated in the near future. It's going to set out some of those issues I've just been talking about in a bit more detail, and also provide some proposals we've been working on ourselves around what the next steps might be for the strategy over the next 2 years. We're looking to host a number of webinars during November with stakeholder groups, and I'll be following up with Owen and his team in relation to facilitating a webinar with the membership of Cyber Ireland in that respect. As I say, it's going to be, we're looking to get the process with a draft go to government before the end of the year, and I hope that it may sound like we're not maybe being as ambitious as we could be given the challenges, but just to emphasise that we are looking at drafting a comprehensive successor strategy to follow on from 2024, and that process is going to kick off during next year, and it's going to be quite a large process as well. So really, we're focusing on concrete actions for the next 2 years in the midterm review process. And then I've just shared my contact details there. If anyone wants to reach out to me subsequently to talk about the midterm review process or has any other feedback, happy to do it. And I'll be at the stand as well, so anyone wants to come and talk to us during the day as well. So thanks very much.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much, Peter, for that kind of outline in terms of where we're going strategically in terms of review of the National Cybersecurity Strategy. I think, as Joe mentioned, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into more or less where we're going from, I suppose, in regard to capacity building, the partnership approach, and it's very much driven by developments in Europe. It's a EU effort in terms of pushing this work forward. And of course, it's very important to emphasise that very much, Cyber Ireland is the model public-private partnership in place with government, academia and industry all in play. So basically, I suppose to point out, first of all, my presentation is primarily going to deal with European Union cybersecurity. I think you got a sense as to where that was from some of the questions and the interaction with Lorena around cloud certification, etc. We need to be smart here, so we need to engage with Brussels. We also need to build on the relationships, the transatlantic relationships, and of course with the UK. And this is very much, I suppose, the map is, this is how Brussels sees the European Union and cybersecurity. Brexit has happened, unfortunately the UK isn't there, and that actually permutates in terms of thinking, in terms of regulations that's coming through. It presents us with key challenges in terms of how we do North-South cooperation on the island of Ireland, for example. And it also presents us with strong kind of challenges in terms of addressing the challenges around strategic autonomy, technological sovereignty. This is the kind of language you will read from the European Union cybersecurity strategy from December 2020. I am going to talk very much clearly about what's on the right side here. In essence, very much the establishment of the European Cybersecurity Competence Centre, which is basically within scope in terms of industry, technology and research, the network of national coordination centres, and the establishment of what's called an EU cybersecurity competence community. And I suppose very much just to picture this in the context, Brussels is very much regulation driven in essence. We've had lots of laws coming at us. In essence, we have NIS2. You heard Lorena talking about the new Cyber Resilience Act, which is about addressing suppliers, manufacturers in terms of product safety in a cyber security context. And of course, we have the EU Cybersecurity Act with the certification streams, the 3 schemes in the pipeline, and they will all be implemented as EU law in essence. So it's very much something we need to engage on. It's great that Brussels is very engaged in this space. In the previous existence, I was very much involved with the EU CSERTs network. At the time, the WannaCry event took place in May 2017. It was a key wake-up call in Brussels in terms of what needs to happen. And in that context, I suppose, arising out of that, there was a desire to effectively see how can we act as a key focal point. In Europe, we're dealing with effectively US technology. We have the soft power of the internet in terms of US. We're also dealing with the challenge of China. So EU is struggling. Where is its role in the world in that context? And what the European Union is desiring to do is to build up critical mass in terms of cybersecurity industry. So let's develop a competence centre. Let's pool funding from Digital Europe programme, from Horizon Europe. We're talking here about 2.5 billion euro between 2021 and 2027. That effectively is to be matched in effect by equivalent funding from the member states. That's what the strategy says it is. And of course, I'll come on very shortly to the Digital Europe programme itself. But it's very much about pooling resources, prioritising more or less EU indigenous enterprises in essence, and that's where particularly the indigenous sector in Ireland can avail of the opportunities that are rising in this space. And it's also an opportunity as well to connect more, given the challenge that we've already had with Brexit, the need to build direct links to the continent itself. And that brings me on to the Digital Europe programme. So effectively, very significant funds are now being available for cybersecurity. We're talking here about 50% co-funding. We're talking about projects 2 to 3 years in duration. We're also seeing that they will have various requirements in terms of security clearance, but also in terms of the types of enterprises that can engage in that space. So I think very much there's a lot happening in terms of the Digital Europe programme itself. It's not just about cybersecurity, it's covering high-performance computing, AI, digital skills, cyber. We're looking at this from the point of view also of digital innovation hubs. With colleagues in Enterprise Ireland and Enterprise Trade and Employment are leading on, in essence, in this space. And of course, it's very much looking at seeing how can we focus a little bit more on applied research on deployment, in essence. How do we more or less secure? We've heard about the challenges coming through NIS2 in particular. So the question then is, given those challenges, what type of investment needs are out there in terms of helping us in this space? So with that in mind, if we move on then to what the Digital Europe call is. There was a first call this year in cybersecurity, and this call in cybersecurity only deals with core aspects of cyber. So for example, dealing with Euro QCI, for example, in terms of quantum communications, that's a separate program. If we're dealing with digital skills as well, there's a separate program for this. This is solely the EU cybersecurity program through Digital Europe. We're talking about 1.65 billion on that particular program alone. We've had a call in the health sector earlier this year, and the second call will launch in November we're talking about approximately 230 million available in essence. So 50% co-funding. If you're an SME, it's 75% in essence. So this is, I think there's real opportunity here to engage in this space. We are looking at developing our own national coordination centre in an Irish context. So that's very much with the member states. But there's also kind of, Lorena mentioned, SOCs. And when the EU talks about SOCs, they're not just talking about infrastructure, they're talking about information sharing and analysis centres, they're talking about security, community security and response teams. So it's very much an elastic concept. So that's something just to bear in mind. We're not just talking about a physical SOC to protect systems. And of course, as Lorena mentioned, there's been a lot of discussions ongoing in that place. Not only are they looking at national SOCs, in inverted commas, but also so-called cross-border SOCs and how they're going to work in practice with industry. It's also worth mentioning that there are significant funds there as well in terms of NIST directive supports and also with certification. It's worth bearing in mind in the past, we actually have had, I suppose, a number of operators of essential services, particularly in the energy sector. We've seen the National Standards Authority of Ireland, and we've seen also the Central Bank of Ireland avail of EU co-funding in this space, whether it be around the concept of secure information sharing, or indeed in terms of cybersecurity certification. And I suppose that brings us right to what is the NCSC itself doing in this space? Well, we are effectively being designated as of late last June as the National Coordination Centre for Ireland under this regulation. So very much three key aspects. It's about industry engagement and outreach, and we're going to have a particular conversation, I think, with Cyber Ireland in that space, because we think certainly there's a lot there, that we can work with Cyber Ireland in terms of the multiplier effect, in terms of getting that engagement in place. It's about policy, strategy, and community membership. So we're going to have a formal EU cybersecurity community, which de facto means we will have a national community, because you have established in Ireland, you'll come through the NCSC for membership. In essence, that creates huge networking opportunities in the context and collaboration opportunities in dealing with the research challenges, particularly from the research community. And we're going to see how we can avail of this new national structure to address some of the key challenges in terms of which we're hearing in terms of the distributed nature of cybersecurity research, the need for enhanced collaboration. So we see that as well. We also see scope as well through the regulation can provide for what they call block grants to member states in terms of providing financial support to third parties. And we're going to be seeing, particularly from about an innovation perspective, but also from a resilience perspective, what are the actual needs here? We're going to develop a program, and we're going to be putting it in place over the next 2 years. So we envisage putting an application into Brussels. The initial stages have already happened. The pre-verification checks are now underway in Brussels. From next February, we hope to have effectively a funded NCC up and running from August, September next year for a 2-year duration. That will include, of course, a support program for industry in that context. And I suppose just to move on as well, just to see from a conceptual, from a governance point of view, how do we see this development centre working in essence? As I mentioned, we will have, of course, effectively a national community, but we also need to influence the direction of EU funding in this space. And in that regard, we will be looking at establishing a strategic advisory group, both from public sector stakeholders, and also with regard to the research community in particular, to guide us in that space, and of course to try and ensure that we increase the potential for successful outcomes in terms of projects, EU co-funded projects in this space for industry. So I think that kind of brings me to I suppose the final aspects of this is, in essence, the centre has to be established with or without effectively support through Digital Europe. We're going to be launching a web presence in the next few weeks. We are hoping we'll have a webinar on the 17th of November in terms of addressing 3 key aspects, just to announce the launch of it, in essence. to highlight Digital Europe funding opportunities in detail. So we will go through them in detail for you, but also to, I suppose, more or less try and more or less start the basis of creating, an ecosystem, a research ecosystem from the perspective of the opportunity this regulation, provides us with, not just in the context of what needs to happen in an EU context, but also very, very importantly, what do we need to do in terms of the opportunity it presents, in terms of working, on a transatlantic basis, but also in terms of a north-south and east-west basis with the UK as well in this space, because I think there's great opportunity to leverage the kind of the structures that comes with this to do what we want to do in an Irish context, as well as what we're going to be doing as a member state of the European Union. I should mention as well that at the stand, the NCSE stand, there is an expressions of interest form available for completion. More or less, we encourage you, if you're interested in this space, to make contact with them, provide details, your organisation details, and also ask for a little bit in terms of your field of activity. It's based again on some of the requirements that are coming through in the regulation as well. But that will give us an opportunity. We will be looking at organising webinars, we will be looking at newsletters, we will be engaging with you. We'll be trying to do that in the most cost-effective way possible, minimising duplication, and of course, availing of the expertise that comes from Cyber Ireland in this space, and we will take it from there. So you have the contact detail for it. So please reach out to us, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much for the presentations from the NCSE and Department of Communications. Overall, it's a positive story that's been told with regards to the increase in staff, the increase in investment, and that we are working on the same challenges around skills development, around coordinating cybersecurity research in Ireland, and our goal of having a national cybersecurity research centre. Around engaging with Europe and the development of this National Cybersecurity Coordination Centre, which we're looking forward to working with the NCSE on and to input into. But there are no doubt challenges there as well. And I think the key point coming across here is that we need a strong National Cybersecurity Centre to also have a strong industry in cybersecurity in Ireland. And in our cybersecurity sector report, we've outlined the opportunities that are there to grow the industry in Ireland. And off the back of that, we've developed our position paper, which does make a number of recommendations, including the first one, which calls out the priority of the government being a driver for the cybersecurity industry sector as a coordinator, as an incubator, and a catalyst as well. And likewise, having a strong cybersecurity industry in Ireland, made up of both domestic companies and also multinationals, feeds into having a strong national cyber resilience. So I think we're very much aligned on those areas. So we're going to have some time for questions from the audience. If you do have a question, if you could raise your hand, and we'll get one of the runners to come across to you. But just to start off, I might pose the question to the panel, whoever would like to take it around. I suppose, do we have a coherent policy to develop the cybersecurity industry at a government level?
I'll take that question.
Sorry, there's...
Thanks. I suppose the opportunity now exists through the midterm review of our national cybersecurity strategy. We've reached out already to colleagues in enterprise, trade and employment and in Defence as well in regard to the innovation and research perspective, to see how we can build on this. We have the opportunity that's coming in terms of the mandate now for the NCSC in the context of the EU Competence Centre. I think the opportunity there is to avail of that, to build on that and to see to what extent we can be, I suppose, more joined up. I think we need to be more joined up in this space. If you look very closely at measures 14 and 16 of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, we're still waiting to have a research programme in place. also in terms of, also in 16 in terms of the enterprise program. So we want to see how we can realize this. We will not be able to do it on our own. We will certainly need to do this, across, with our partners in enterprise trade and employment, and the FAIRs, and of course the agencies. So part of my job is I'm reaching out at departmental level. We'll also be reaching out at agency level as well to see how we can build on this. And of course, practically in the context, of course, of what we're doing in terms of the webinar that we'll be hosting to launch the NCC, we're also looking at effectively seeing to what extent we can reboot the kind of the workshops that we held in late 2020 in this space with Science Foundation Ireland, particularly on research, to see how we can build on this.
You can hold on to it, James. We can bring up another one. Do we have questions? Yeah.
A question going back to the beginning. I guess from my accent you could tell where I come from. So I was interested to see the amusing slides. I'm a bit concerned as to where my flight's going to land on my journey back. I just wanted to take you back to the state actors and the threat to the critical national infrastructure. Now, in the past, in the United Kingdom, we've seen two specific actors with two specific modes of operation. So we've seen Russia and we've seen China with two different modes of operation. One, Russia, very targeted. China, less so, hoovering up information and then sifting that and using it. I wondered whether or not over the last 2 years you've seen a change in their strategies, whether or not they're both acting in the same way, or they are continuing in the same mode of operations that we're seeing or have seen in the United Kingdom.
Thanks very much for the question. I'll have to be limited in what I can say representing the government, but what I can talk about is where we have attributed, and we do that in a process with our EU partners. And to speak to your point, we attributed the Microsoft Exchange server, when those vulnerabilities came out, there was a widespread exploitation of them, and the EU attributed those to Chinese-based actors, not to the Chinese state, but to actors based in China. And that showed, as you've mentioned, a total disregard to any kind of norms. It was very different than, say, the SolarWinds operation, which the US has attributed to Russia, which was very targeted, which was very careful in which victims were picked. Whilst there was widespread exploitation of that vulnerability, they then selected their targets and killed the connection with any targets they weren't interested in. And that's in total contrast to the Microsoft Exchange server incident, whereby thousands and thousands of boxes all across the world were exploited with web shells. So I think that speaks to the point you're making there. As I said, I can't go into too much detail on many instances, but there's two examples whereby the European Union has come out and made a statement on the matter.
Just before we go on to our next question, I suppose Paul touched on it earlier in his introduction. The number one challenge for industry, coming back from our survey, is the skills shortage. And 65% of our members found that they had personnel-related issues. And, we're setting out a target of having 17,000 jobs in the cybersecurity sector in Ireland, an increase by 10,000. We're already seeing significant skills shortages, which is in fact impacting both industry and government agencies like yourselves. So I suppose, what can we do about this from both a public-private partnership, but in particularly from a government perspective in addressing this skills gap?
Thanks, Owen, and I fully agree. I think that's, I definitely took it to heart, I guess, in terms of, the critical success factor, for that target that is set for the growth of the sector is around availability of personnel. We need 10,000 additional qualified staff if we're going to grow it. So I suppose what we've been focusing on to date in the strategy has been around raising awareness of cybersecurity skills and working with existing structures in that sense. And then I think we've seen positive development, I guess, in terms of from the educational institutions in terms of more and more offerings in terms of training and courses, which is really positive. I think that's something we can really value there. As James has mentioned, we're developing a relationship with a new department which deals with further higher education and skills. And I think that they're very positively disposed to working with us more in relation to skills training in particular. So I think there's a lot of scope there for us to do more in that space. But absolutely, it needs to be sort of headline. And as I said earlier on, talking to colleagues in the public sector, they really see a major challenge in terms of both recruitment and retention. And unless we can find a way to square that, but absolutely we want to work with Cyber Ireland and with industry, to hear from you. And absolutely we hope to get your feedback in the midterm review process in relation to what we should be doing differently, where the funding should be prioritised, and where we need to emphasise this work. But no, it's a really big challenge and vital if we're going to see the sector grow as we want it to.
And I think a key part of that is the next generation of cybersecurity professionals, and that's why it's important to see the course develop for secondary school students as well.
No, you're absolutely right, Owen. And actually, there's some really interesting work happening as well, even looking at primary level. That the earlier the evidence we're seeing internationally is that the earlier you can engage the children, identify cybersecurity as a career opportunity for them, and introduce some of the concepts around cryptography and so forth. That's a really good prospect then that you're going to send them down a positive pathway career wise. But it's a good. The pilot has been really useful. We've gotten some really useful learning from the first year, and we're into new schools now for this year. So as we're hoping now, that'll help us, I suppose, to sketch it out in terms of what it might look like, both from a short course and then hopefully moving forward to see it introduced in the curriculum more broadly.
And I suppose that's what we'd like to see from an industry perspective as well, that cybersecurity would be included in the Leaving Cert curriculum as part of the computer science course. Stefan?
Thanks, Owen. As just a side note, I know it's already anticipated. I was shocked myself about that slide. So you're representing the public institution. I would caution you, please do not do that next time. It's not the wise thing to do. Removing a country is not diplomatic.
Stefan, if you can keep to a question.
Yeah, Owen. So you guys all mentioned about the engagement, industry engagement. You engaged with the European entities, with the transatlantic entities, with NATO center, and then there was a small mention of industry, generally speaking, in industry. So my question is about the national strategy document that you guys are drafting up. So the local indigenous industry, I'm talking about Irish local indigenous, were they invited to contribute to that national strategy document, or that space was reserved only to big FDIs, large organizations?
No, there was a broad stakeholder group from industry were involved. So the consultation exercise on the 2019 strategy saw the establishment of a number of stakeholder groups with education and research, with public sector and with industry, and it was a broad representation there of the sector. Now we weren't unfortunately in a situation to have a mature industry cluster like Cyber Ireland at that stage that we could have that opportunity. So there's a real opportunity for us now at the midterm review to reach out and indeed as we've heard earlier on with the regional structure as well there, that we're getting beyond Dublin and Cork, which is really important too. But no, it's certainly it's an area where there was an opportunity, but we hope to do more in the midterm review, and then more again I think in the process for the successor strategy that will start next year.
Thank you.
And to note, we do have an Irish SME committee as part of Cyber Ireland as well, which is chaired by Pat Larkin from Ward Solutions. And if you do want to make a representation from Cyber Ireland, if you can contact myself or Pat during the day. So, look, we're just out of time, I'm afraid. I know people want to get a coffee and take a break, but the NCSC do have a stand outside, so they'll be able to answer some questions for the day. And I'd just really like to thank Joseph, Peter, and James for their time, their contribution to the conference.